the podcast. A buck 72. Boxing's biggest names, boxing's biggest stories, boxing's biggest fights, greatest memories and moments. We cover it all with Lee Groves. He is a writer, an author, a CompuBox counter, a hell of a nice guy living there in beautiful, friendly West Virginia. And some of those accolades I just said to you, writer and author, kind of sets the stage for our very special guest who will be on with us today, right?
Very much so. And our guest is amongst the most accomplished writers alive. And not just because of his deeds writing about boxing, he writes about all sorts of different subjects that have been adapted to movies and TV movies. And he is one of the most versatile writers that when we go into the next segment and when I introduce him, I'll go over some stats that will illustrate just how accomplished this man is. And that is Hall of Famer Thomas Hauser.
Yeah. And, when you think about that, I'm thinking the reason that boxing has played itself so well and large and looms so large on the big screen and with books is because fighters and their stories, such a great metaphor for life. And I think that's why one lends to the other. And yes, he has done a lot. We're talking about Thomas Hauser. He'll be with us pretty much the entire hour. We might even go into overtime with somebody like him. Wouldn't surprise me. Not a whole lot of other stuff to get to. We're just going to focus on Thomas Hauser, boxing, and a whole lot of other stuff that we'll get to right after this. Back in this corner, the podcast, boxing's biggest names, boxing's biggest stories, boxing's biggest fights, greatest memories and moments, and our special guest can cover that and a whole lot more. In fact, Lee, you're the numbers guy in so many ways. Give us the numbers as we get ready to introduce this young man.
Well, let me just say a few of them. First of all, he is a 1970 graduate of Columbia Law School. Very impressive. He has written nearly 60 books that span multiple genres, nonfiction, fiction. I think there's even a children's book thrown in there as well. His first book, The Execution of Charles Horman, An American Sacrifice, was adapted into the 1982 film Missing, that starred Jack Lemmon and Sissy Spacek, and his book Final Warning, The Legacy of Chernobyl, served as the basis of the 1991 TV film Chernobyl, The Final Warning. He is also the only man in the history of the Boxing Writers Association of America to have received both the Nat Fleischer Award for Career Excellence in Boxing Journalism and the A.J. Liebling Award for Outstanding Boxing Writing. And on 11 occasions, Hauser has won first place awards from the BWAA for investigative reporting, one of the toughest and most demanding categories that there are. There's simply no one better at what he does than Thomas Hauser, and that's been the case for many, many years.
Yeah, and we pride ourselves in matchups, and I always say that my eyes are amongst the best in boxing. You don't want to as a writer, Lee, you don't want to match up against Thomas Hauser, for when an award is on the line. And let's just say, hopefully that's enough accolades and plaudits for a Hall of Everything type of writer, Thomas Hauser. How you doing, Thomas?
Well, thank you for that over-the-top introduction. I appreciate it. And I certainly should pay tribute to a bunch of other really great boxing writers like Don McRae, for example, in the UK, Mark Kriegel here in the United States. the craft of boxing writing isn't what it once was, and we've lost a lot of giants in recent decades, but there are still some very, very good writers out there, and it's an honor for me to be one of them.
Yeah, that is a great way to kind of start things because I'm going to go back to what you just said because my concern, just like I am about boxing in America, have we lost those kind of writers forever? We'll get to that in a bit, but talk about your upbringing, growing up in New York, and Lee set the stage for a lot of us. Give us a little up close and personal on, your childhood and how you got into this craft of writing.
Well, I grew up in Larchmont, which is a suburb of New York. I went to Mamaroneck High School, which was the public high school for Larchmont and Mamaroneck. Then I was an undergraduate at Columbia, went to law school at Columbia. My first year after law school, I clerked for a United States District Judge. Then I spent 5 years as a litigator on Wall Street with a firm called Prevail, Swain and Moore. And I got bored. The last case I worked on involved the issue of whether allowance for funds used during construction was properly capitalized as an item of other income on the consolidated balance sheet of the Detroit Edison Company. And I realized that even though tens of millions of dollars was involved, I didn't care. So I started to look at other jobs, other legal jobs, everything from the U.S. Attorney's Office to the American Civil Liberties Union to other law firms, in-house counsel jobs. And I realized I didn't want to practice law anymore. So what do I do? Well, I'd always liked writing. Uh, a lifestyle. I love the idea that 100 years from now, somebody can be rummaging through an attic somewhere, find a book I wrote, and spend an afternoon with it. So I decided to take a year off from law, write a book, see if I was any good at it, and if I could make a living at it. And I had a stroke of extraordinary beginner's luck. The first book I wrote was made into the movie Missing, and I had this really silly idea. Oh, this is easy. I mean, you write a good book, they turn it into a movie, you make a gazillion dollars. Doesn't work that way. It's more like being a club fighter, but I love it. And I got into boxing in 1983. I had just finished writing a murder mystery keyed to Beethoven's music called The Beethoven Conspiracy. And I wanted to write a sports book because I'd always been a sports fan. Well, you can't just walk into Yankee Stadium and talk to the Yankees. You can't walk into Madison Square Garden and talk to the Knicks. But boxing is an open sport. You can walk into any gym in any city in the world and talk to the fighters who are training there. So I wrote a book about the sport and business of boxing called The Black Lights. Enjoyed it a lot. Then I put boxing aside, went on to do other things. I wrote, as Lee had mentioned earlier, the Chernobyl book that was made into a movie with John Voight and Jason Robards. And was in the midst of writing a novel about, it was a thriller about a wealthy industrialist who is manufacturing nuclear weapons for sale to third world countries when I got a call asking if I was interested in meeting with Muhammad and Lonnie Ali, who wanted a definitive biography of Muhammad's life written. That would have been in 1988. So I met first with Howard Bingham, who was Ali's best and most trusted friend, then Muhammad and Lonnie. And initially, I wasn't sure I wanted to do it, to be honest with you. I mean, Muhammad was along with John Kennedy, one of my two boyhood heroes. But by this time, he was not in good health. I wasn't sure how much he could contribute to the book, although I later learned a lot because his thought processes were still good. And he still had a good quality of life. It wasn't the way it evolved later on. But I didn't want to work on this project if it was going to depress me. And Lonnie said, look, come out to Berrien Springs, spend, 3 or 4 days with us, and we'll see how we get along. And I said to myself, okay, I mean, that's not bad. The worst thing that can happen is I'll spend 3 or 4 days with Muhammad Ali at home. And I went out there, and that was the start of a wonderful relationship. I wrote the book, Muhammad Ali, His Life and Times, which came out in, I guess it was 1991. And then I put boxing aside again to go on with other things. In 1999, when the internet was starting to become a factor, I began writing articles for the internet, first for HBO Boxing, then for House of Boxing, which ultimately went under. And then for Seconds Out in 2001, Robert Waterman signed me to write for Seconds Out. And at the time, Seconds Out was a wonderful website. It's really a placeholder now. But back then, they were doing cutting edge investigative work, really good work with a good team. And that was really when I morphed into my current role in boxing, which is as a chronicler of the contemporary boxing scene. And for the past quarter century, I have written regular essays, articles, reports, call them what you will, about every aspect of boxing. And look, I understand that in boxing circles, I'm probably best known as Muhammad Ali's biographer, also for The Black Lights, which was my first book about the sport and business of boxing. And I've written two novels about boxing. One is called Mark Twain Remembers, which is a book about Mark Twain's slavery and boxing. And the other is called Waiting for Carver Boyd, which actually might be the best pure boxing writing I've ever done. And those are all very important to me. But in the end, probably my most unique contribution to the sport, I feel, is the manner in which I have chronicled the contemporary boxing scene for this quarter of a century. And I've been fortunate in that I've had, very good outlets that have allowed me to ply my trade, although it's not always easy to find them as the landscape keeps shifting. Um, I've had the cooperation of a lot of wonderful people. Uh, I'm privileged in that dozens of fighters have allowed me in their dressing room for the hours before and after some of the biggest fights in boxing history, which is a privilege I never take for granted, but it allows me to write for a fight from a unique perspective. And I love it. I've said many times that some of the best people I've ever met in my life are in boxing. Many of the worst people I've ever met in my life are in boxing, but it is never dull. And if you can't write boxing, you can't write. And look, you two guys have been in boxing for a long time, so you understand the
Oh yeah.
addictive quality of the
Yeah.
sport.
Well, thanks for that. That was great. It made me think. I'm currently working on my own book, and I have this piece of equipment here called the Plod, and this is actually not a commercial. I should send them a bill for that, because I'm recording it because my mom said to me the recently. She calls me Jimmy because my name is James
Yeah.
Smith. She said, you can write great, but you're not a writer. You're a broadcaster. You've got to. And she recommended that I do it into something and whatever. And this leads me to my question, because I say great punchers are born great punchers. They can improve, but they're born great chins. They're born with it. To be a great writer, certainly you can go to school and college and improve. But are great writers like Thomas Hauser? Is it a born innate thing?
There are two components to writing. One is that it is a very demanding, painstaking, meticulous craft. You really have to work at it. I never took creative writing courses in college or literature courses in college. The best writing lesson I ever had was when I was working on Wall Street. The way the firm was set up, you have a senior associate and a junior associate, and I was a junior associate on a case. And I wrote a memo for the senior associate, put it on his desk when I went home. And when I got in at 9:30 the following morning, the memo was on my desk. And I'd always been a pretty good writer. I liked writing term papers and briefs, memos. I thought it was pretty good. And he had taken what I had written, and it was almost, he had put arrows on it, crossed out words, moved things around. And what I realized from that is you have to challenge every word you put on paper. Lonnie Alley asked me to review something she had just written about Muhammad. This was years ago. And there was a sentence in it that said Muhammad is one in a million. And I said, no, Lonnie, if Muhammad was one in a million, there would be 350 more just like him walking around the United States. Muhammad is not one in a million. Muhammad is unique. And you have to do your homework. You really, I mean, I see so many stupid mistakes that people make in their writing because they just don't double check something. When I'm writing an article about a fighter, I still go to boxrec.com to check the record to make sure the fight that I thought ended on a ninth round knockout ended in the ninth round and not the 10th or not the 11th. You really have to do your homework. Other than that, is there something that's in you? Yeah. Alan Lerner, the wonderful, wonderful creator of My Fair Lady and Gigi and some under just wonderful, wonderful Broadway musicals, wrote once that, you know, nobody told him to become a composer, lyricist. It was just in him. And I feel that somehow this was in me. So yeah, do I think I have a gift for it? Yeah, just like any fighter, even a club fighter has a certain gift for it because you could take a very low-level club fighter and he's much more gifted than 99% of the people who are out there. But I feel like writing is something that was in me and I love doing it. I feel like I haven't worked since I left Wall Street. There are times when I play very hard, maybe a little harder than I'd like. So, but even if it's in you, you have to work at your craft.
Yeah, well said. As I flip it to another outstanding writer, Lee Groves.
Welcome to the show, by the way.
Well,
Thanks
thank
for
you.
being on. Uh, Many writers dedicate themselves to a particular genre, but your career is special because it has been incredibly versatile. How have you been able to write so expertly about so many different subjects, and how do you go about picking the subjects that you want to write about?
Well, okay. First, you make a very, very good point because I haven't confined myself to one genre. And the truth is, it's hurt me commercially. My first book was Missing, which was a true life story about an American who was killed in the aftermath of the coup in Chile. Then I wrote a book called The Trial of Patrolman Thomas Shea, which was a book, again, nonfiction, about a New York City cop named Thomas Shea who shot and killed a 10-year-old black boy and became the first cop in 50 years anywhere in the United States to be indicted and tried for murder for an act committed in the line of duty. And actually, one of the things I'm most pleased about with regard to that book was when it came out, I got a letter of commendation both from the NAACP and the Patrolmen's Benevolent Association. And I'm not sure that could have happened in today's world, but what I told myself was okay, I split it down the middle. Uh, so I had carved out a name for myself as a chronicler of true life events in dramatic fashion. And then I decided to write a love story set in a large Wall Street law firm called Ashworth and Palmer. And the editor who loved the two, you know, nonfiction dramas, didn't want the love story. And then I wrote a murder mystery. And then I wrote a philosophy on moral values. So, in that sense, it's hard to gain a niche. Stephen King, by and large, writes one wonderful horror story after another. John le Carre did spy story after spy story. But for me, it's wonderful because I keep getting into new worlds. And if I hadn't gone from, nonfiction drama to murder mysteries to love stories to books on public education and the philosophy on moral values, I never would have gotten to boxing. And look at all the joy I've gotten out of my life in boxing. In more recent years, I wrote a novel about Charles Dickens, and I just finished writing a Sherlock Holmes novel, writing as Dr. Watson. So what I can tell you is I have a lot of fun doing it. It's a lot of work you don't just sit down and write a novel about Charles Dickens. First, I had to read everything that Dickens wrote,
Mm,
which I will say is better than reading everything Robert Ludlum wrote, but it's still quite a task. And then I had to do a lot of research on Dickens's time, the world that he lived in. But again, for me, I love it. It's like I escape into those worlds. And for me, when I'm actively involved in a book, it's as much fun as watching a movie on television. I really love it. And I actually have to push myself to get out and at least do one social thing every day to be with people because I don't want to be a hermit and I don't want to get caught up too much inside my own head.
right. Well, you've written reality-based books and you've also written fiction. Um, which genre is more challenging and which genre do you prefer writing about?
I like them both. With nonfiction, for me, the greatest fun is in the research. And once I have finished my research, it's really all there. And there are times it can be a little tedious putting all the pieces together because I know what's there. With fiction, with a novel, there's a lot of research that goes into a novel. But for me, the fun part starts when I sit down and start writing, because that's when the characters become real. And they really do. And I'll have an outline for a novel. And when I get to a certain point in the novel where a character is going to do something, this voice inside my head is the character saying, no, I wouldn't do that. That's not who I am. That's the person I created has evolved, and let's go on a different track. So I love that. Also, one of the most gratifying books I wrote was a personal memoir about my mother called My
Mm.
Mother and Me. She died, I guess, 3 years ago at age 96. She had a long, fulfilling, wonderful life. And I wanted her to have that marker. The truth is that, look, 99.999% of us are completely forgotten after we're gone. Charles Dickens wrote that, 100 years after his death, who will be remembered better? David Copperfield, who didn't really exist except inside Dickens's head, or the millions upon millions of people who trod the streets of London daily. I wanted my mother to have that marker, and she knew I'd be writing the book, and she had told me to be completely honest. She said, "Don't make me out to be a saint," which I didn't. But I was very fortunate to have had her as my mother. My Mother and Me, which is what the book is called, is my last gift to her. And there are even some new Ali anecdotes in the book because she did have the opportunity to meet Muhammad, and the exchanges between them were quite wonderful.
You
And
mentioned,
I should add, since we're on a boxing podcast, is that Jim Lampley very, very generously agreed to read the audiobook
hmm,
for me. And so Jim literally last week finished reading the audiobook version of My Mother and Me. So that should be up online. I would
Oh, that's all. You know what? Because I just had told my mom that I was going to order the book. I'm gonna. When will that be available? Like on Amazon, I would assume.
My Mother and Me.
Yeah, with Jim Lampley doing
Well,
the
yeah,
narration.
the Jim Lampley narration will be available on Amazon, certainly. Not sure. As I said, literally, I guess that he finished reading last week, and yesterday, Monday,
Wow.
uh, sent the you know sent the digital, whatever it is you send in. I have the technological capacity of a gerbil, but send it in. So I'm thinking within a month it'll be up. And look, Jim, I was very honored that Jim chose to do that. One, he's a very good friend, longtime friend. And two, look, this is one of the most recognizable electric voices,
Right.
and he'll bring something very special to it.
That's cool. Keep going, Lee.
well, you mentioned the book about your mother being something with which you are very proud. Are there other books of yours that sort of reach the top tier of Tom Hauser's list?
Sure. And here I'd really distinguish between the books I'm best known for and the ones that I'm proudest of. I mean, certainly my two calling cards are The Execution of Charles Horman, which was then made into the movie Missing and reissued as Missing, and the Muhammad Ali biographer,
Yeah.
the Muhammad Ali: His Life and Times. And I've always said with regard to Missing that I didn't get enough credit for the book and I got too much for the movie. Uh, and with the Ali book, I'm very proud of it. What those two books do is they ensure, I'm not sure immortality is the right word, but they ensure that my name as an author will already always be out there. And then people might say, well, let's see what else this guy wrote. If I'm looking at other books I'm particularly proud of, I wrote, as I mentioned, a novel about Mark Twain's slavery and boxing called Mark Twain Remembers, which I think is a very good book. The Final Recollections of Charles Dickens, which is my Dickens book, I would put at the top of my list. My Mother and Me obviously has a special place in my heart. And one of the other things I'm quite pleased with is you mentioned something like close to 60 books, and that might be an exaggeration just by virtue of the fact that many of those books, maybe 20, 25 of those books now are collections of articles I've written over the years. I was fortunate in that for years, the University of Arkansas Press each year brought out a collection of all the boxing articles I'd written the year before. And now that has been taken over by Admission Press. The job of publishing them has been taken over by Admission Press. And that's important to me because they give all these articles permanence. I don't have to worry that a server is going to go down
Mm.
somewhere in cyberspace and those articles will be lost forever. And because of sites like Abe Books, abebooks.com, which is a wonderful site that I can promote because I don't get a penny from it. Abebooks.com is a consortium of used bookstores all over the world. And you can go to Abe Books and type in any book, and then up on the screen will come, you can buy this copy in hardcover for $3.95, and this is in paperback, and you can configure it so the cheapest prices come up first, and you can get literally any book from there. So, even if a book goes out of print, which many of my earlier titles have, it's still there for anybody who's looking for it. And as a writer, I always say one of the most gratifying things about writing is the realization that on occasion somebody actually reads what I write, and Abe Books ensures that they can read what they want to from what I've written.
You know, I want to play. This has become a regular feature of our show in recent episodes. I want to play a little name game with you. I will give you a name, and you tell me in a short little burst what comes to mind when I say the name. The first one is Arnold Palmer.
Well, there is. I assume you chose Arnold because, as you know, I was Arnold official biographer. Uh,
Yes.
um, Grace, charm, excellence, excitement. Uh, elaborating elaborating on that, he's the man who brought golf to the masses.
Mhm.
And he also, with Mark McCormick, redefined the economics of sports. Before Arnold, if an athlete did a shoe commercial, he got $500 and a dozen pairs of shoes. Uh, Literally for 30 consecutive years, I think it was from 1960 through 1990, 30 years, Arnold was the top grossing athlete in the world in terms of endorsement income. Finally, Michael Jordan surpassed him in 1990, 91, whatever those 2 years, I forget which. But Arnold, yeah, every athlete who makes a dollar off his endorsement deals owes part of that to Arnold.
Yeah. Mark
Next,
Twain.
America.
Yeah. What inspired you to sort of channel the spirit of Mark Twain when writing your book?
Well, okay, this book had a unique origin. I had a dream that I woke up from. And all I remembered about the dream was that there was some sort of natural amphitheater looking down into a canyon, and there was a boxing ring in the bottom of the canyon, and that it had something to do with Mark Twain.
Hmm.
That was the entirety of what I remembered from the dream. But it stuck with me so strongly. The visual was so strong that I started playing with that in my mind. That was the seed from which this giant oak tree grew. And, like everybody else, I'd read Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn and, maybe bits and pieces of other things that Mark Twain wrote. But again, I sat down, I read everything Mark Twain wrote, all of his books anyway, and collections of his essays. I read a number of biographies about Mark Twain. Then I had to do a lot of reading about slavery because that was a major theme in the book. In a way, I was able to cut corners. It was easier than the Dickens book
Hmm.
because the Mark Twain's story, as I wrote it, takes place in a small town in Kansas in 1856, I guess it was,
Mhm.
sometime around there, 58. So all I had to do was channel Gunsmoke and James Arness and Matt Dillon from my early TV watching days. And there it was for me, the small town Dodge City, fine. Okay, change the name and I'm there. When I was
Yeah.
writing the Dickens book, I had to recreate London in 1836. And that was a lot tougher. I actually had to research that one.
Very much so. Billy Costello.
Billy Costello will always be my champion. Uh, my first book about boxing, as you know, was The Black Lights. It's a book that puts the whole sport and business in context. And I wanted to tell that story through a fighter. I wanted a champion, but I didn't want a champion who was such a big name that didn't have to struggle to get a TV date. And ultimately, I built the book around Billy, who was the WBC 140-pound champion at the time. His manager, Mike Jones, and his trainer, Victor Valley, were wonderful in welcoming me with open arms. I really embedded myself in Billy's camp. They're all dead now. Victor lived to a good, ripe old age. Mike died young from multiple myeloma. And then Billy tragically died at a very young age from non-smokers' lung cancer.
Hmm.
And I felt badly about all their deaths, but particularly badly about Billy. He was a really, really good guy. I really liked Billy. There were no pretensions about him. He got the best that he could out of his ability, with a lot of help from Victor Valley and good matchmaking from Mike. Yeah, but Billy will always be my champion.
Kind of why I call them, as not to interrupt you, Lee. Kind of why
Sure.
I call them fighters, the most common yet uncommon of all athletes. Keep going, Lee. I know you got a few more.
A couple more names. Vicky LaMotta.
As you know, I worked on a book with Vicky, her memoir. Uh, Vicky was a survivor. That is the first thing that comes to mind. She was abused as a child. At age 16, she married Jake, who abused her more. She got out of that very abusive relationship, went on to go through life and triumph on her terms. And of course, she's known for posing for Playboy at age 51. And I guess I have to mention that. That's part of the book. We talked about that. And the book, by the way, Knockout, is available. It's still in print from Amazon. It's called Knockout. But when we talked about it with Vicky, and Vicky said, "Look, I was 51 years old, and I wasn't on welfare. I wasn't trying to hustle anybody. Playboy came to me and offered me a lot of money, and I made a choice, and the choice was right for me." I'm not saying other people should make that choice, but there are lots of people who do a lot of things for money, including getting married. So Vicky did it with dignity. She turned down a lot of posing opportunities after that. She was a survivor, and more than a survivor. She flourished in her later life. I was very fond of her, and working with her on that book was a wonderful experience.
And finally, your mom. You wrote a book about her, and not every son does that.
Yeah.
My
No,
mother and me, yeah, we were just talking about it.
Yeah.
uh, wonderful woman, went through a lot in her life, had soaring highs, lows. As she went through life, she became a much more generous person, a much happier person. But she really had a wonderful life, and I'll let people read the book and make their own evaluation. And if people, my email is out there, and I'll say it again now. It's Thomas Hauser Writer, all one word, Thomas Hauser Writer at gmail.com. And if any of your listeners, viewers, read My Mother and Me and want to get in touch with me about it, and they have questions or thoughts they want to share, I hope they'll do that. One of the most gratifying things for me is the emails I get from people, not only in the United States, but from all over the world, who say that they read the book and it changed the way that they are relating to their children or their parents, because it's more than just a biography of my mother. If that was the case, I could have, Xeroxed off 50 copies and sent it to people, who knew her. It's a book about how relationships change as you get older, about the aging process. Larry Merchant has a wonderful quote. He said, "It's easy getting into your 80s, but hard getting out of them."
Hmm.
And most of us don't think about what it's really like when you get old, and I'm not talking about middle age, I'm talking about when you wake up in the morning and you're tired and you know you're going to get more tired as the day goes on, when it's an effort to change a light bulb. And I'm not talking about climbing on a step ladder and changing an overhead light bulb, which you'd have to be nuts to do at a certain age. But just a light bulb pops. Okay, you have to get up. You have to unscrew the lampshade, take it off, unscrew the bulb, sort of walk unsteadily and throw the bulb in the garbage, then walk down the corridor to the closet, take another light bulb off the shelf, walk back. I'll spare your listeners the whole list you have to do. But changing a light bulb, and for me, when a light bulb blows, I go, oh, and then I'll say the four-letter word. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that on your podcast or not.
Yeah.
Starts with an
I
F.
think they know.
Yeah.
But it's an automatic oh fuck,
Yeah.
and,
Lou
and,
DiBella kind of made it.
and have Lou DeBell on your podcast. But and a minute later it's changed. Um, when you're 90, it's a chore.
Yeah.
And it's just part of the whole long thing. You don't see as well. You don't, all the things they say happen to you when you get old, happen to you when you get old. The only question is when. And this is a book, among other things, it's a celebration of life, but it's also a book about the aging process and what people with older parents should think of in dealing with them. And, what parents should, understand that maybe they should communicate to their children about their own needs.
Yeah, you just gave me an idea too when I go see my mom up in Ellijay, Georgia. My mom's 87 now. That I think I like what you said about, because rather than sitting there and reading it together, we can touch a button and Jim Lampley's voice will be there, and I think it'll be quite cathartic for me and my mom. We'll take a quick break, back with more Thomas Hauser in this corner of the podcast. We'll be back.
I got two options. Option one, I can accept defeat. Option two, I can get up. I can get tougher. I can get faster. I can get stronger. And then I go get mine. I made my choice. Have you made yours?
Back in this corner of the podcast with the extraordinary writer and author Thomas Hauser. Lee, you prepared so many wonderful questions that we went over today, so keep going.
Well, this section it deals with Muhammad Ali in particular. We all have initial impressions of famous people without having ever met them. How did you see, how did you perceive Muhammad Ali before you met him? And how did that change once you got to know him?
Okay, you have to go way back in time for that. My first impression of Muhammad Ali was at the 1960 Rome Olympics when I saw him on television. And I guess I was 14 years old at the time, and he was 18. So it was just one kid looking at somebody and saying, well, I don't even think I would have used the word charming back then, just said, yeah, I like him. He seems like fun. Then I followed him through his early ring career, through the exile in boxing. And I actually met Muhammad Ali for the first time in 1967.
Hmm.
I was a senior at Columbia. I had a weekly radio show called Personalities in Sports, where each week I'd take this bulky old reel-to-reel tape recorder out into the field and interview people, like the New York Yankees, the New York Knicks, the Jets, whatever, met some good people that way. And before Muhammad fought Zora Foley at the old Madison Square Garden, I set up an interview through John Condon, who was the head of PR for the boxing, went down and interviewed Muhammad, did a 10-minute interview with Muhammad Ali. And that day I also interviewed Angelo Dundee, Zora Foley, and Emil Griffith, who was on site. So that was the first time I met Muhammad, and he was glorious. I mean, let's start with the fact that he was probably the best looking person who ever lived. I mean, Leroy Neiman had a wonderful phrase for him. He just said he glowed. I mean, he was
Yes.
just incredible, incredible physical specimen. And he was, people used to say that one of the nice things about Muhammad was he'd give as much time to a kid from a local high school newspaper as he would to the boxing writer for the New York Times. And I know because I was one of those kids.
Yeah,
He
so was
sat,
I.
yeah, okay, so there you are.
Yeah.
He sat, he talked with me for 10 minutes. I still have the tape, which I transferred to digital a long time ago. So that was my first meeting with him. Uh, when I met him again in October of 1988, obviously it came with a whole different set of preconceptions. And I've told this story often. I went out to Berrien Springs and I really wasn't sure what to expect and went to bed the first night. I got up in the morning and it was really hard for me to make eye contact with Muhammad almost. And I went down to the kitchen. He was sitting at the breakfast table and he said to me, do you want cornflakes or granola?
Hmm.
I said to myself, Tom, loosen up. I mean, don't put him on a pedestal, just relate to him like another person. And that was the start of a wonderful, wonderful relationship. And the two things that impressed me most about Muhammad as I got to know him well, which I did, in the 10 years that followed, was one, how genuinely spiritual he was. There was a time when Muhammad was young when he fit his religion to what he wanted to do. By the time I got to him in 1988, that had changed. He was conforming what he did to his religion. At the end of each day, he literally asked himself, if God were to judge me based just on what I did today, would I go to heaven or hell? And he lived his life in accordance with that. The other thing that impressed me about Muhammad was what a genuinely nice person he was. He was really an incredibly nice man, and that really stayed with me. And those are things that you don't have to be Muhammad Ali to have those qualities. You can be a very spiritual person, whether you get to that through religion or your own secular morality. I've said many times that, as we go through lives, our, our personal relationships, our education, our jobs, our health, almost everything is dependent on the whim of outside forces. But there's one area where we have complete control over our own destiny, and that's our own moral fiber. And Ali came to understand that, and he lived his life accordingly.
Most people remember Ali for, the poetry, the jokes, the public persona, the braggadocious part of his personality. How much of that was really Muhammad Ali? Because in private, he was seemed to be a very thoughtful, spiritual person, as you said. How much of that public persona was the real Ali?
That was a big part of Muhammad Ali's personality. And in some ways, I mean, I don't know how thoughtful Muhammad was per se. He was not a deep thinker. It was more a question of reacting to things as they happen. Occasionally, he would think deeply on a topic. One of the things that troubles me most, and I think it's a real tragedy, is that people say, oh, Muhammad Ali stood up for his principles. But we have at least two generations now who have no idea what those principles were.
Yeah.
They know that, oh, he stood up to racism, and oh, he refused induction into the United States Army. They don't have a clue that during the most important years of his life, he adhered to an ideology that said white people were devils who were created by an evil scientist with a big head named Mr. Yaqub. I mean, he really believed that, which is just another form of religious belief, but he believed that. And he preached an American form of apartheid. And one of the things, to segue off for a bit, one of the things, or take a diversion, one of the things that makes the autobiography of Malcolm X such a great book is that it shows the journey that Malcolm traveled from somebody who hated all white people to somebody who went to Mecca and came back and wrote his famous open letter to the New York Times, where he said, as a result of my pilgrimage, I now understand that people of all colors snore in the same language. And Ali traveled a similar journey, but certainly he did his most important work was done in the 1960s before he came into mainstream America. And one of the things that happened after the 1996 Olympics in Atlanta, and those Olympics were very good in that they introduced Ali to a whole new audience, but they were bad in that that's when corporate America rediscovered Ali, and he was turned into a Disney character for economic gain. And yeah, people made a lot of money from it. But it's sad now because, look, I grew up in an age where Joe Louis was very respected, but I didn't really understand what he meant to America as a whole and Black America in particular. I mean, Joe Louis was a towering, towering figure in this country. I mean, when he fought Max Schmeling in the rematch at Yankee Stadium in 1938, it was the first time that many people ever heard a Black person referred to simply as the American. I mean, that was an extraordinary step forward for this country. And now there are generations that sort of look on Ali as this benevolent figure without understanding what he risked.
Yeah.
This was somebody who, acting alone without any support system, giving up the heavyweight championship of the world for his beliefs. And now you see people and institutions crumbling under threats from the government. We need some more people like the young Muhammad Ali now to stand up for what's right in this country. And I don't want to get too off onto politics, but that Ali was a very, very important political and social figure. And a lot of that is completely lost now because younger generations don't have a clue what he stood for.
Before you keep going, Lee,
watching the Will Smith movie isn't going to teach you.
Yeah,
Oh,
before you
yeah.
keep going, Lee, it makes me think that I'll never forget amongst my great memories with Ali. He kind of let me stay in his life from 71 all the way until he died. It was Ali that actually introduced me to Joe Louis. And it was he actually took the time to to take me up to a podium. I already knew about Joe Louis because I was a well-read little youngster, but when I think back to that now, it moves me to think that Muhammad took the time to take this little white kid up to Joe Louis, and he explained to Joe. So it just again, I sometimes still to this day get emotional when I think about Muhammad Ali. Sorry there, Lee.
No problem. No problem at all. You experienced the young and brash and vibrant Muhammad Ali, and you also experienced the Ali in decline. How wrenching was it for you to experience that decline?
What I came to understand when I spent time with Muhammad, and it was really a 10-year period, I guess from 1989 to 1999, where I was very much in the loop. So I missed the dreadful, long, sad goodbye. But in the years that I spent with him, what I realized was that Muhammad didn't feel sorry for himself. So there was no reason for anybody else to feel sorry for him. He loved being Muhammad Ali. He still got pleasure from life. He felt that God never gave anybody a burden that was too heavy to carry. And I asked that question of Leon Spinks, when I interviewed Leon for Muhammad Ali, his life and times. And Leon had talked quite a bit about his feelings for Muhammad. And at the end, I asked Leon the same question. Do you feel sorry for Muhammad? And Leon said, what for should I feel sorry for the man? He's still eating. He's still got a roof over his head. And best of all, he's Muhammad Ali.
Leon.
That's Leon, and he
Yep.
got, yep. When was the last time you saw Ali?
Oh, gee, the last time I really had a sit down with Ali, long sit down, was probably, around 1997, 98, 99, in that period. Uh, and yeah, there were a couple of times after that where we, you know, passed at occasions and stopped and hugged. But yeah, the last time we really talked, and of course near the end, he really it was very hard for him to talk. But again, you have to put this all in context. Nico Ali, one of Ali's grandsons, who's a lovely young man who I wish wouldn't box because I think the Ali family has sacrificed enough on the altar of boxing.
That
But
opinion sounds familiar, doesn't it, Lee?
Yes, it
But
does.
Nico said to me, you know, people ask if I felt sorry seeing this old, slow talking, shuffling man. And Nico said, no, because that's the only grandfather I knew. I can see films of him when he's young, and we've all seen, I'm young, I'm fast, I'm handsome, I can't possibly be beat. And, have you seen Sonny Liston? Yeah, ain't he ugly? But, I mean,
Mhm.
the Ali that Nico knew was the older Ali, and he felt the warmth and love that came from that man, and he reciprocated towards his grandfather.
Mhm.
Lee, I'm gonna bypass the break, and you'll take us into the current stuff, and then talking about Thomas's latest book. But I do
Yeah.
want to ask because I was the little boy with Ali who idolized Ali, and I grew up and did whatever I've done, and I ended up doing the final interview with Joe Frazier on television, and I came to have a tremendous respect for Joe Frazier. And I think I can't put into words, I've tried over the years, March 8th, 1971. For me, and maybe it's just me and some of my ilk, I think it's not, I think it's the greatest sporting event ever. I don't think there ever was a night like March 8th, 1971. So if you could just speak about their first fight, and Joe Frazier, and then we'll get into some contemporary stuff before we let you out of here.
Okay. I was there.
I know. I heard you were. Yeah.
I was actually, it was my first year out of law school. I was clerking for a federal judge.
Wow.
You know, I'd say at that point, my favorite sports were baseball, football, and basketball in that order. But I was a big Ali fan. I read in the New York Times the tickets had gone on sale, and I wrote away for tickets. I got two mezzanine seats, which is the last, the upper deck of the garden, two mezzanine seats in the last row,
Wow.
$20 each. And I went with a friend, so I was there that night, and it was electric. As far as Joe is concerned, yeah, one of the tragedies is that Joe never really got the due that he deserved as a person and as a fighter. And Muhammad was partly responsible for that. As you know, I adored Muhammad. I was and still am a huge Ali fan, but he was unnecessarily cruel to Joe. In the
Yeah.
first fight, he branded Joe an Uncle Tom. In the second fight, he labeled him ignorant. In the third fight, he called him a gorilla with all of the ugly racial connotations.
Yep.
And Joe felt very strongly that he never got the respect from his own people, which mattered enormously to him because of Muhammad. And he's right. And Joe, let's be honest about it, Joe hated Ali till the end. And I know there were times when they got together, you know, usually for an economic incentive as time went on. But if you listen to Joe's answering machine in the old days, it was, you know, that he crushed the butterfly. I remember once being with him and Muhammad was having a rough day of it. And Joe looked at me and with a great deal of satisfaction said, I did that to him. You
Hmm.
know, that was just ugly. I understand it. Uh, Muhammad, you know, wanted the past to be in the past. Muhammad said to me, you know, I couldn't have done what I did without Joe. He couldn't have done what he did without me. And if God ever calls me to a holy war, I want Joe Frazier fighting beside me. Joe held on to his bitterness until the end. It's very sad, you know, if they are meeting together now up in heaven, paradise, whatever you want to call it. I'm sure Joe wants Ali Frazier for. Muhammad is saying to George Foreman, no, look, he fights with him, you know, George, you fight him, you know.
Yeah.
And at that point, Joe might say, no, I really don't want Foreman Frazier 3.
Yeah. Now to something even sadder, the current state of boxing. Lee, go ahead.
Boxing has always been known as the most resilient of sports, but it's clear that at least in America, the sweet science is nowhere near where it was 30 or 40 years ago in terms of mainstream impact. You've studied the sport inside and out. How did boxing get here?
It was a long, slow decline. If I had to point to the key factors, one, there are too many champions, and it's ridiculous. I mean, baseball now is focusing, I shouldn't rephrase that. America is focusing now on baseball. There's going to be a World Series champion very soon. You know, you have one Super Bowl champion, you know, one US Open champion in golf and tennis, one NBA champion. We all know the Oklahoma City Thunder were the champions last year. Boxing has so many champions that there's nobody on the face of the earth except maybe Dan Raphael who can keep track of them. And, you know, I'm not even sure Dan could without looking at some crib sheet on it. You know, it's just, it demeans it devalues the meaning of the word champion. It takes away from the sport. So that's number one. I mean, there was a time when the heavyweight champion of the world, I mean, that was the most coveted title in sports. My mother could have told you who the heavyweight champion was, and it didn't have to be Joe Louis or Muhammad Ali. It could have been Ingemar Johansson, and she would have
Mhm.
known. I guarantee you, if you walk out on the street, or if anybody listening to this podcast walks out on the street afterwards and stops 50 people and asks, do you know who the heavyweight champion of the world is? The answer you're going to get most is, well, I don't think it's still Mike Tyson. Very
Right.
few people are going to even know the name Alexander Usyk. So that's number one. Number two, boxing has adopted an economic model that cuts its flagship events off from the greatest number of sports fans. How popular would Tiger Woods have become if you could have watched him play in the Monsanto Open, but you had to pay $79.99 to watch him in the Masters, the US Open? That economic model has to end. Now, promoters are partly responsible that for because for the way promoters look at boxing, and I don't like a lot of what Dana White is doing now with TKO. I don't like, there are very few things I like about Zuffa boxing. For
Mhm.
me, it's going to be bad for fighters and bad for the sport. But one thing Dana says is that you have promoters and they treat every fight like it's a one-off. They have the fight, they put as much money on it from it as they can in their pocket, and then they go on to the next one-off. And sometimes, somebody like, Top Rank, more in the past than now will really spend time and money and effort building a fighter. Unfortunately, what happens now in today's world is the fighter leaves them at a certain point after they've invested all that time and money and effort. But there's no sense of larger good in the sport. In the National Football League, the teams all compete with each other, but there's a sense of larger good. They don't trash each other's shows. There's nobody is looking out for the best interests of boxing, except maybe Margaret Goodman, and everybody else is just looking out for themselves.
Mhm. In recent years, Turk Al Sheikh has injected untold millions into boxing, and as a result, there's several dream matches were turned into reality, sometimes two, three times over. However, there are two sides to every coin, and several articles that I've read have exposed the negative side of Turk Al Sheikh. Is he good for boxing? Is he bad for boxing? Or is he somewhere in between?
I think it's in between. I give that first, let's put all the political issues aside,
Right,
because there are a lot of political issues that come with Turkey Al Sheikh's resume and Saudi Arabia. I've written about those in the past. You know, People seem to have moved beyond that. So let's look at it strictly in boxing terms.
right,
There are some things Turkey Al Sheikh has done that I give him a lot of credit for. Most notably, unifying the heavyweight championship of the world when Alexander Usyk fought Tyson Fury, which would not have happened without Turkey Al Sheikh's intervention. No, I don't like the fact that he sat by while Usyk was stripped and the title was fragmented again. And Daniel Dubois round up with it, and then we had to have another unification title fight. But I give Turkey Al Sheikh a lot of credit for unifying the heavyweight championship, for orchestrating those two fights between Dmitry Bivol and Artur Beterbiev. Yeah, give credit where credit is due. What I don't like is the fact that many of these fights have been brought to Saudi Arabia. There seems to be a sense that, well, we can buy everything we want without welfare for the good of the sport. It is still a very, very expensive proposition to watch boxing. I mean, look, for the average fan, can't afford to watch the fights that he or she really wants to see. They're just too expensive. And from what I can see, that's going to continue with the Saudi TKO domination of boxing. And the new Zuffa Boxing League, one, I see that from what I've seen of the draft contracts is exploiting fighters. Fighters are required to enter into coercive contracts if they want to join the league. There are caps on their pay scales. Full disclosure isn't required. Basically, what it seems to be doing is wiping out all the Alley Act protections
Well,
for a very small, limited, maybe to a group of one, promoters. And there are a couple of things that are slight improvements, like saying that, well, fighters have to get $150 a round, for a fight. But, most fighters get that $150 a round anyway. And actually, that would hurt small promoters because very often fighters are paid in tickets. If you have a popular local ticket seller, the promoter might say, here's $5,000 worth of tickets, sell them and keep the money. And the fighter, wouldn't be able to do that in the same fashion under the act. And then also there's a requirement for $25,000 in medical insurance, which would kill a lot of small club shows. And let's be honest, $25,000 isn't going to buy you a cup of coffee in the emergency room
Yeah.
if there's a serious injury. So yeah, I support, a minimum purse per rounds and some required medical insurance. But I think the downside to the Alley Act amendments, and they are changing the Alley Act. They like to say, no, we're not, but they are. Because if you look at the statute, the Alley Act specifically amends the Boxing Reform Act. So yeah, if you would add a new amendment to the Bill of Rights, you were changing the Constitution. And so this is changing the Alley Act, which is part of a larger law.
Would you say that Dana White is good, bad, or in between?
We haven't seen. We haven't seen, have we? I mean, right so far from what I've seen, Dana promoted one fight between Canelo Alvarez and Terence Crawford, which lost tens of millions of dollars
Mhm.
and was a loss leader for TKO to get them attention. I don't know that you have a healthy sport when people lose tens of millions of dollars on every fight card they promote. And also, that was on Netflix, which again is behind a paywall of sorts. It wasn't pay-per-view, for which I'm sure a lot of fans were grateful. But let's see what Dana does over the long haul, both for fans and also for fighters. And let's see how much transparency there is in what he does. Maybe it will turn out well, maybe it won't. I also have to say that I was out in Las Vegas for Canelo Crawford, and the boxing media was treated with a great deal of disdain. And, I won't complain about my own treatment because I had a pretty good experience out there. But, yeah, the powers that be now do tend to be dismissive of the boxing media. And there are still some very good boxing people out there, in the media, fewer than there were before, but there are
Mhm.
still some very good ones.
Hey, Lee, I don't think my stomach, I see here on the list you have some Jake Paul stuff. I can't stomach hearing his name, so why don't we just bounce to the end stuff?
Well, if you were suddenly charged with the
I'm
task,
happy. I'm happy to do Jake Paul if you want. I'm not a fan of.
okay,
Yeah, well, then I'll let you. I
okay.
just every Lee knows how there's certain guys that I won't even put on this show, and but go ahead. Yeah.
So what's your assessment of Jake Paul and what
Okay,
he's
look.
done?
First, on the positive side, I give Jake Paul credit for becoming the best club fighter that he can be. He's not world class. He's not a top level club fighter. He has become a club fighter who, if, Larry Goldberg put him on one of his small club shows at Sony Hall, or somebody else put on a small club fight show someplace else, he would be a perfectly acceptable, I think probably relatively exciting fighter. So I give credit to anybody who learns the trade, takes the punches, and gets in the ring and fights. We all understand that he hasn't fought serious opposition yet. That comes with the territory.
Hmm.
Uh, Having said that, boxing created the opportunity
Yeah.
for Jake
Yes.
Paul to flourish. Uh, Boxing created so many bogus titles. I mean, you have a woman named Ebony Bridges, who I think a lot of people probably remember, who was famous for very large breast implants and showing up wearing sexy lingerie at weigh-ins. Now, I will say that I give Ebony Bridges a lot of credit for being a fighter and fighting as well as she could. I actually saw a club fight of hers that was her first loss, and she really got in there and fought, more than I could do. So I give her credit for that. Having said that, for boxing to find a sanctioning body, a major sanctioning body that made her a world champion. I mean, this is the environment that allows somebody like Jake Paul to flourish. When you don't show the fans fights that they want to see. So fans, especially casual boxing fans, lose the ability to distinguish between who the good fighters are and who the pretenders are. That gives you the environment in which Jake Paul can flourish. So Jake Paul as a fighter is a symptom to me of what is wrong with boxing. Now you have to look at Jake Paul, the promoter. Obviously, he is trying to make a mark now, specifically in women's boxing. And I like some of the things that he's done in women's boxing. Um, I guess he did Taylor Serrano 2 and 3. Both
Yep.
of those were wonderful fights. So let's see. And he's also obviously involved in promoting a lot of social influencer type boxing, which I don't think highly of. So let's see how it goes, particularly once Jake stops fighting.
If you were suddenly charged with the task of fixing what's wrong with boxing, what would you do?
Have a big slug of coffee for
Yeah,
one thing.
Yes.
yeah,
Maybe something stronger.
probably say I'm too old and I really don't want to work that hard. Look, there's a guy
Okay.
named Ed Pereira, who's not a well-known name now, who is working very hard to put together a company called I Visit Boxing. There were signs of Ed out in Las Vegas during Canelo Crawford fight week. There were, I guess, two of the big hotels there had those 40-story billboards for I Visit Boxing, and people are going by wondering, well, what's that? Ed is trying to put together a package deal now, which, if he succeeds, it would be incredible for boxing. It would really honor boxing's finest traditions and bring boxing back to the public and communities and people in the very real way. So, if
Who
he's
is Ed? Who is, because I don't know
well,
that name.
Ed Pereira does not have much of a high profile. He had a company called, still has a company called I Visit Media, which does the logistics for major, entertainment events. Like it could be something like a Beyonce show or a Super Bowl halftime show or whatever. He is the person actually who arranged for the logistics for the Ring Awards banquet in London at the beginning of this year, and also did a lot of work coordinating with New York City for the Times Square show, which I personally thought was a disaster on a lot of
Hmm.
levels. Ed is now no longer affiliated with Turkey Al Sheikh. He is pursuing this vision on his own. And if he is successful, it might be transformative for boxing. Beyond that, yeah, I don't know how I can tell you what has to be done, but I don't know how it happens. I mean, people have to make fights the public wants to see. And, it doesn't have to be, huge name fighters. Jaron Ennis, who is a very, very talented fighter, just
Mhm.
had a disgraceful fight against some guy he whacked out in the first round. I would rather see the guy Jaron whacked out in the first round fight somebody of his own skill level, which is a real fist fight. I mean, one thing UFC gets very right, you go to a UFC show, and if there are 7 fights in the card, the arena's 2/3 full for the opening bell because fans know that they're going to get 7 fights that, at least on paper, are competitive.
Yeah.
I would much rather see, and Lee, you're a boxing guy, and Smitty, you're a boxing guy, so I think you feel the same way. I'd rather see two guys with 8-6 records who both have a realistic chance to win, who are giving everything they have in a fight each other, than watch some guy who's 16-0 fight somebody who's 5-7 on the
Right.
undercard. I mean, it's Steve Farhood and I used to go to the fights together, and we
Yeah.
had a ritual. If there'd be 8 fights, one of us had to pick the winner of all 8 fights to win a 50-50 bet, which I think was 50 cents. And more often than not, the guy who had to pick all 8 winners won. And that
Mhm.
hasn't changed much. That's one of the things that's killing boxing because it's not entertaining. And at the end of the day, years and years ago, I had a fan who emailed me something. He said, I'm in marketing. One of the things I learned was I can sell perfume that smells bad. I can sell shirts that are ugly. The one thing I cannot sell is sports that are boring because fans know whether or not they're being entertained. Well, there's a
Yep.
lesson in that for boxing and for everybody who's involved in boxing. So if I was going to do one thing to improve boxing, I would say, put on more entertaining fights.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Makes me
Stop,
think of,
stop lying to the public and stop saying that this is every press release I read says this is a massive stacked
yeah, stacked.
undercard, and you look at the undercard and it's garbage.
Yeah. Yeah. I was groomed on the Chris Dundee's Tuesday night fights. And other than, you knew Gomeo Brennan or Louis Rodriguez or some of the guys in the main event or whatever, the rest of the show, it would be packed at the Miami Beach Auditorium or Convention Center, and nobody really necessarily knew all that. You just knew every fight was probably going to be a competitive fight. This brings us to
Just to add one thing on that, if I
yep,
could, there was a period where we trusted HBO to do that. When
yeah,
HBO started Boxing After Dark, we didn't have to know who Arturo Gatti or Marco Antonio Barrera or some of those other guys were, which we didn't at the time because we trusted HBO
all right.
was good fights. And boxing is a great sport. At its best, it's the greatest sport of all, but no sport abuses its fans as badly as boxing does today, and that has to stop.
And Lee,
Yeah.
he's got another book out, Thomas, doesn't he?
He does. And you recently released a new book called The Most Honest Sport. And since it's about boxing, is it an ironic title or is it an honest title?
No, the most honest sport refers to what goes on inside the ring.
Right.
Where I think boxing really, you got 2 guys who are, stripped down, virtually naked, who are in the ring, and everybody can watch every move they make. And there's something, exceedingly noble and honest about that. And what this is, it's a collection of all the articles I wrote about boxing in 2022, I'm sorry, 2023 and 2024. And it's a wide range. So it's the mix of, historical pieces about historic fights, issue-oriented pieces, explorations of PEDs. There's even a piece on the opera about Emil Griffith that the New York Metropolitan Opera produced. So it's a wide range of material. It'll make people laugh, cry, happy, angry, whatever. And the most honest sport seemed like a good title for it, although I will tell you the working title for my next book, which will come out next year, is called The Vulture Sport, which is the
Okay.
opposite side of that coin.
What would
So,
I got a typewriter up there, my old typewriter, and I occasionally I go around and talk to some of the younger boxing writers. I do it more, and broadcasters. I do it more from a broadcast point of view. But what advice, and you're not limited to boxing, we obviously know that, but what advice would you give to a young boxing writer, who admires what you've done as to how they navigate through this landscape now to become hopefully a Thomas Hauser?
I am asked that question often, and I always say that there are 3 things you have to do if you're going to be a boxing writer. Number one, if there's free food, grab it. Number two, fighters are some of the most wonderful, courageous, intelligent, warm people in the world, but you have to be a little nuts to be a fighter. And I've never known a fighter who disagreed with that. And number three, maybe most important and quite seriously, every single thing you write becomes part of your creative legacy. So you should take as much care and invest as much time and energy and fact check everything and work hard to make sure everything is right for every article you do. It should be the same whether it's for a small, obscure website or the New York Times, because we're talking about your creative legacy. If you want to become a boxing writer because you think you're going to get rich, forget it. But if you have a passion for boxing, it's a great writer's sport, but do yourself and the sport justice.
I'm going to end this with you the way I end it with all the fighters on my television show In This Corner, which, by the way, is still on the air after 21 years. Lee, I was trying to figure the last time I got a paycheck for my show. Anyway, that's another story. He made me think of it when he talked about the money end of it, the monetary side. But how does Thomas Hauser want to be? I know you're not done yet, but how do you want to be remembered as a writer and more importantly as a man?
I think they're at the end of Charlotte's Web, that wonderful children's story by E.B. White. He's speaking of Wilbur, the pet pig who befriended Charlotte. And, and the last lines are, there aren't many people who are both a good friend and a good writer. Charlotte was both. So if people remember me and say that, I was a good friend and a good writer, I'll be happy with that.
Well said. Great stuff. And you're not done yet. And hopefully I'll see you in Canastota. I hope in June at the International Boxing Hall of Fame. Truly one of the best ever to do it. And it covers a lot of things more than just boxing. Thomas Hauser. Thanks, Thomas. I appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me, both of you, and I mean that sincerely. I enjoyed it. I hope we can do it again.
We will take one last break and be back to wrap things up right after this. Back in this corner of the podcast, $172, man, that was good stuff with Thomas Hauser. Talk about somebody who's seen it all and been a part of it all, and I love the fact that he's so well-versed in so many other things. His sagacity, perspication, and sapience is there, but yet, boy, does he love boxing, doesn't he?
Yes, he does. And you take a look at some of the titles of his books. He has a high regard for boxing, the sport, but there's a lot about the sport that is not so good, and he's honest about reporting that too.
Yeah, if you ever, there's no doubt boxing is the good, the bad, sometimes the ugly, and the red light district of boxing. You know who said that, right?
Red Smith, right?
I think it was Jimmy Cannon. Jimmy Cannon, I believe. Yeah. So Lee, I got to ask you something. How does that look?
Looks good to me.
Yeah, teeth looking pretty good. So we went on. You were part of this journey. Yeah. I had to get so much done with I had to get a sinus lift. I had to get the bone build up, and then the little compartments put in there for the implants, and that, of course, was all done by our good friend Dr. Nam
Fun.
Yes, and that set the stage for the closer to come in, the Mariano Rivera, the Dennis Eckersley, the great closer. And in this case, that's my good friend from Smile Sketch Vegas, Dr. Adam Persky and Dr. Silva. They've been carrying the load from this point on, and they got me right where I need to be with my pearly whites, and they do a fantastic job. Dr. Persky's been working with me for, I think, over 20 years. Smile Sketch Vegas is at 8930 West Tropicana Suite 6. I'll be there again in 2 weeks, and then they start all the cleaning and all the things that they do with the hygiene and what have you. But by the way, if you're in Vegas or coming to Vegas, you want a great dentist, Smile Sketch Vegas, Dr. Adam Persky, Dr. Silva, 725-205-8854, 725-205-8854, Dr. Adam Persky, and again, they're called Smile Sketch Vegas. So I'm glad that part, this long journey is just about over. And we're just about done, but I know there's a couple of things you wanted to mention before we get out of here. It's been a long podcast. We went into deep overtime. We're doing Miami Dolphins, Kansas City Chiefs, Christmas Day, 1971 stuff here. All we need is Garo Upremium. You're going to be Garo Upremium here.
Well, I can think of a lot worse things to be. I wanted to bring up a fight that's going to be taking place later today. I think it's on DAZN pay-per-view.
Okay.
It's a fight. It's a heavyweight fight.
I thought DAZN didn't have any more pay-per-views.
Well, that's what they said in the beginning, but we know different, don't we?
Yeah.
Anyway, the main event is a title fight between secondary WBO heavyweight champion Joseph Parker, a man you know well, and Fabio Wardley. And to me, that's a very interesting fight. And kudos to both guys for taking this fight on a card that's appropriately entitled All or Nothing. Parker was in line to fight Alexander Usyk next. He's the secondary champion after all. But when Usyk let it be known that he wasn't going to be fighting again this year, it would have been easy for Joseph Parker to just wait it out. But that would have meant him being on the sideline for more than a year. And at age 33, that's not exactly the best plan of action, or inaction in this case. So he decided to fight Wardley. Wardley's an undefeated power puncher. He has 18 knockouts in his 19 victories. Parker has had chin problems in the past. And in his last fight, in Wardley's last fight against Justice Hooney, he was way behind on points before he scored a come from behind knockout. So there's vulnerability on both sides here.
But Hooney is not Parker.
Correct. As for who I think is going to win, I think Parker is going to use the same blueprint that he used against other big punchers like Deontay Wilder and Zhilei Zhang. He's going to box, he's going to move, he's going to score some points, he's going to counterpunch, and he's going to use his experience and ring generalship to neutralize what Wardley does. It won't be the most exciting fight, but I think Parker will get the job done, and I think he's going to win on points.
Okay. All right. And we haven't figured out what we're going to do next week. We're going to be here next week. We just don't know what the heck we're going to do. But we want to thank Thomas Hauser. Really good stuff there. His new book again. Plug that new book of his again, if you will.
Yeah, The Most Honest Sport. That's the title of it. You can find it on Amazon. I think it's out now. It's a compilation of his articles for the last 2 years. As he said, it covered a whole bunch of subjects, and I'm sure that it's going to make for terrific reading.
All right. Congratulations, dazzling dawn in your new home. Happy for you with that. That's just a personal thing. Every once in a while, Smitty throws out something. You have anything personal to say? Anything at all?
No,
maybe your sister's retirement. That's something pretty cool.
That's true. She's going to be retiring. Halloween is her last day, and she's certainly looking forward to it. And all of us are very happy for her.
Scintillating Cindy is very excited about retirement. In this corner of the podcast, $172. Garo Upremium. Snap, set down. Kick is up, and it's good. So long, everybody.